Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mysterious Murmurs. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1, Room 616. The Grand Oak Hotel had stood for over a century, its towering structure casting a long shadow over the city's main street. Its Victorian design was elegant but aging, with ivy creeping up its sides as if trying to reclaim it. Generations of travelers had passed through its ornate lobby, leaving behind whispers of their secrets in the creaking floorboards and faded wallpaper. But beneath its charm, the hotel held a secret, a room that wasn't on any map or blueprint, a room that only appeared for those burdened with regret. Room 616. The arrival Sam Porter arrived at the Grand Oak late one stormy evening. The rain pounded against his car as he parked in front of the hotel, staring up at its looming facade. His career as a successful real estate developer had crumbled after a series of bad decisions. He had alienated his family, lost his home, and now drifted from one cheap motel to another. Tonight, the Grand Oak was his refuge from the storm. Inside, the lobby was warm, a stark contrast to the cold rain outside. The desk clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, looked up as Sam approached. "Good evening," she said, her smile faltering when she saw him. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Do you have any rooms available?" Sam asked, his voice tinged with desperation. The clerk hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We're fully booked, except for one. Room 16. Sam frowned. "That'll do." Her hands trembled as she handed him the key. "If you need anything at all, just call the front desk." The hallway. The elevator creaked as it carried Sam to the 6th floor. The air grew colder the closer he got to room 616. The hallway was dimly lit, the carpet worn thin in places. At the far end, the door to room 616 stood out. It was older than the others, its wood dark and cracked, with an ornate brass plaque displaying the number 6116. Sam inserted the key and turned it. The door opened with a low groan. Inside the room was eerily quiet. It smelled faintly of mildew, as if it hadn't been used in years. The decor was old-fashioned, faded floral wallpaper, heavy drapes, and an antique armchair by the window. A rotary phone sat on the nightstand beside the bed, its cord coiled like a sleeping serpent. But it was the mirror that dominated the room. It covered one entire wall, its tarnished silver frame glinting faintly in the dim light. Sam caught his reflection as he set his suitcase down. His face looked gaunt, his eyes hollow from years of guilt and sleepless nights. He felt a chill run down his spine. The first night Sam lay in bed, unable to sleep. The storm outside had subsided, leaving an oppressive silence. At 3:16 a.m., he woke with a start. A faint whisper drifted through the room, just barely audible. He sat up, his heart pounding. The voice was familiar, too familiar. "Sam, why did you let it happen?" It was his ex-wife's voice. He turned to the rotary phone, but it didn't ring. The whisper was coming from the mirror. His reflection stared back at him, unmoving. As he approached the mirror, the whisper grew louder, more accusatory. "You ruined everything," the voice said, now a chorus of familiar tones. His wife, his son, his colleagues. Sam stumbled back, his breathing ragged. The whispers stopped as suddenly as they had started. Trapped. The next morning, Sam tried to leave. He packed his bag and headed to the door, but it wouldn't open. No matter how hard he pulled or twisted the handle, The door remained locked. Frustrated, he called the front desk on the rotary phone. The line crackled, and the clerk's voice came through, faint and distorted. "Mr. Porter, you can't leave." "What do you mean I can't leave?" he shouted. "You checked into room 616, she said, her voice trembling. "The room decides when you can go." The line went dead. Sam's frustration turned to panic. He banged on the door, shouted for help, but the hallway outside remained eerily silent. The second night, as night fell, the whispers returned. This time they were louder, angrier. The mirror reflected not just Sam, but shadowy figures lurking behind him. Their eyes glowed red, and their mouths moved in unison, though no sound came out. The rotary phone rang. Sam hesitated before picking it up. "Hello," a deep, gravelly voice replied. "Do you want to know the truth?" Before Sam could respond, the line went dead. The mirror's surface rippled, and one of the shadowy figures stepped through. Its face was a grotesque distortion of Sam's own features. "You can't run from us," it hissed. Sam backed away, but the figure advanced, its footsteps echoing in the small room. Suddenly, the door swung open. A man in a rain-soaked coat entered, his face pale and drawn. "You're here too?" the man asked, his voice shaky. Sam nodded, too stunned to speak. "The room found you, didn't it?" the stranger continued. "It only appears to those it wants. I've been trapped here for weeks." "How do we get out?" Sam asked desperately. The man shook his head. "You don't, not unless you face it." "Face what?" The stranger pointed to the mirror. "Your regret, your guilt, that's what keeps you here. But no one ever survives it." The mirror's truth. The mirror shimmered again, and this time it showed a scene from Sam's past, the day he walked out on his family. His ex-wife's tear-streaked face stared back at him, her voice echoing in the room, "You chose yourself over us." The shadowy figure lunged at Sam, dragging him toward the mirror. The stranger tried to pull him back, but his hands passed through Sam as if he were a ghost. "You can't fight it," the stranger said. Sam screamed as the mirror's surface enveloped him, pulling him into a dark, endless void. The cliffhanger, the room fell silent. The stranger stood alone, staring at the mirror. Slowly, his own reflection began to move independently, grinning wickedly. The rotary phone rang again. The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with the ringing phone and a final text. "Would you answer?" Story 2, The Bloodline. The Hawthorne family was ordinary, at least that's what they thought. Laura and her husband David, along with their teenage daughter Emily, lived a modest life in the city. But their lives changed forever when they received an unexpected letter. Laura's estranged uncle, Jonathan Hawthorne, had passed away and left them his sprawling countryside estate. The letter was formal, its tone cold and distant. There was only one condition. They had to live on the estate for 1 full year to claim it as their own. The family saw this as an opportunity for a fresh start. Little did they know they were walking into a centuries-old nightmare. The arrival. The estate was vast, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to stretch endlessly. The mansion itself was a crumbling relic of the past, with towering spires, broken windows, and ivy crawling up its stone walls. It was as though the house was alive, watching their every move. When they stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. The grand hall was lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow them. Emily whispered to her parents, "This place feels wrong." Laura tried to dismiss the unease, chalking it up to the eeriness of an old house. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was waiting for them. the first night. Their first night was restless. The wind howled through cracks in the windows, and the distant creaking of the house sounded like footsteps. Emily, unable to sleep, explored the dusty hallways. She found a locked door at the end of a corridor. The brass plate above it read, "The Bloodline Room." Emily's hand hovered over the doorknob, but before she could touch it, a cold voice whispered in her ear, "Not yet." She spun around, but the hallway was empty. The discovery. The next day, David found a journal in the study, its leather cover cracked with age. It belonged to Jonathan Hawthorne, the late uncle. As he flipped through the pages, he uncovered chilling entries. The pact must be honored. Our blood is the price for their protection. The shadows grow restless. They demand their due. David shared the journal with Laura, and they began piecing together the estate's dark history. The Hawthorns had made a pact generations ago with a malevolent force, a shadowy entity known only as the Keeper. In exchange for wealth and protection, the family was bound to offer one member of their bloodline as a sacrifice every century. As they read, a chilling realization set in. The century was almost up. The shadows awakened. Strange occurrences began to plague the family. Doors slammed shut on their own. Whispers echoed through empty rooms. Emily often woke up with bruises on her arms, as if unseen hands had gripped her. One evening, while exploring the basement, Laura found an altar covered in dried blood. Above it, an inscription read, "To the Keeper, we give what is owed." Suddenly, the shadows around her began to move. They stretched unnaturally, twisting into grotesque forms. A voice echoed through the basement, "You cannot escape the bloodline." The family fracture's tension grew between the family members as fear consumed them. David became obsessed with finding a way to break the pact, poring over ancient books he found in the mansion's library. Laura began hearing voices, calling her to the Bloodline Room. Emily grew distant, her demeanor changing. She spoke less, her eyes often staring blankly into space. One night, Laura found her standing in front of the locked door, her hand bleeding from trying to claw it open. "They're calling me," Emily whispered. "I have to go," the Keeper revealed. One stormy night, the family decided to confront their fears. They broke into the Bloodline Room. Inside, they found a massive, ornate mirror, its surface rippling like water. Around the room were symbols etched into the walls, symbols of binding and sacrifice. As they approached the mirror, it began to glow faintly. A figure emerged from the glass, a towering shadow with glowing red eyes. It was the Keeper. "You have failed to offer your sacrifice," the entity boomed. "The bloodline must pay its debt." The room erupted into chaos as the shadows came alive, attacking the family. The final stand. David grabbed an ancient dagger from the altar, a weapon described in the journal as the only thing that could harm the Keeper. He lunged at the entity, but the dagger shattered against its form. The Keeper laughed, its voice shaking the walls. "You cannot fight what you are bound to." Emily stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice distant. "No!" Laura screamed, pulling her back. The Keeper's laughter grew louder. "The choice is not yours. The bloodline decides." The cliffhanger. The room began to collapse as shadows engulfed everything. Laura and David held Emily tightly, refusing to let her go. But the shadows were too strong. The screen fades to black as Emily's voice echoes, "Don't let them take me." The final sound is the Keeper's chilling laugh. A text appears on the screen. "Would you save her if it meant taking her place?" Story 3, Ashes to Ashes. The town of Black Hollow was quiet, almost too quiet. Nestled in the shadow of a sprawling forest, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets didn't stay hidden for long, or so they thought. The Black Hollow Crematorium, an imposing stone building on the outskirts of town, had been abandoned for decades. Local children dared each other to enter, but few made it past the rusted gates. Stories of strange noises and ghostly figures surrounded the place, but most townsfolk dismissed them as urban legends. That all changed when construction crews arrived to renovate the crematorium into a community center. The urn, the foreman Jack, was a no-nonsense man who didn't believe in ghost stories. He led his crew into the old crematorium, brushing aside the cobwebs and dust. While demolishing a crumbling wall in the basement, they uncovered a hidden alcove. Inside was an ornate urn, covered in strange, ancient symbols. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. The urn seemed to hum faintly, its surface unnaturally warm to the touch. "Looks like some kind of antique," Jack muttered, lifting it carefully. But as soon as he moved it, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. The air grew heavy, and an icy wind swept through the basement, extinguishing their flashlights. "What the hell was that?" one worker whispered, his voice trembling. No one answered. The first night that night, Jack took the urn home, intending to have it appraised. He placed it on his mantle and went to bed. At exactly 3 a.m., he woke to a sound, like whispering, faint but insistent. He followed the noise to the living room, where the urn sat. The whispers grew louder, turning into anguished screams. Jack's hands trembled as he reached for the urn, but before he could touch it, a shadowy figure materialized behind him in the mirror. The next morning, Jack was found dead in his home, his face frozen in a mask of terror. The spirits awaken. Over the following days, strange occurrences plagued Black Hollow. The temperature in the town dropped unnaturally, and a thick, choking fog rolled in, refusing to lift. People began reporting sightings of shadowy figures in their homes, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The worst was at night. Screams echoed through the streets, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The townsfolk grew restless, demanding answers from the construction crew. But the workers had their own horror stories to tell. Tools disappearing, walls bleeding, and whispers coming from the very foundation of the crematorium. The truth revealed, Laura, a local historian, took it upon herself to investigate. She delved into the town's archives, uncovering a chilling secret. The crematorium had been built on sacred land. Centuries ago, it was a burial site for a persecuted religious sect that believed in binding their souls to urns to protect them in the afterlife. When the crematorium was constructed, their graves were desecrated and their urns were sealed away beneath the building. One of the urns, the one Jack had disturbed, belonged to the sect's high priest, a figure known as the Keeper of Ashes. The priest had vowed vengeance on anyone who disturbed his rest, and now the town was paying the price. The descent into madness. As the days passed, the spirits became more aggressive. Windows shattered without warning. People disappeared, only to be found days later in a trance-like state, muttering in a language no one could understand. Laura, along with her brother Chris and their friend Megan, decided to confront the source of the haunting. Armed with flashlights, a journal of ancient rituals, and sheer determination, they broke into the crematorium one stormy night. The basement was colder than they expected, the air thick with the stench of burnt flesh. The urn sat in the middle of the room, glowing faintly. Around it, shadows danced, whispering and moaning. The ritual Laura read from the journal, her voice trembling as she recited an ancient incantation meant to appease the spirits. But as she spoke, the shadows grew larger, their whispers turning into deafening screams. "You cannot undo what has been done," a voice boomed. The Keeper of Ashes materialized, a towering figure cloaked in smoke and ash. His eyes burned like embers, and his voice shook the walls. "This town will burn for its sins." The room erupted into chaos. The shadows attacked, forcing the group to scatter. Chris grabbed the urn, intending to smash it, but the Keeper roared, "If you destroy it, you'll doom them all." As the walls of the basement began to crumble, Megan shouted, "We have to leave." "No," Laura yelled. "We need to finish the ritual." Chris hesitated, the urn in his hands. The Keeper advanced, his fiery gaze fixed on the group. The screen fades to black as Chris looks at Laura, then at the urn, his decision hanging in the balance. The final sound is the Keeper's voice, chilling and triumphant. "Choose wisely, or none of you will leave this place alive." A text appears on the screen. What would you do? Destroy the urn or finish the ritual? Story 4, Silent Caller. It always begins the same way. A dark, quiet night when the world seems to hold its breath. The phone rings, a shrill, jarring sound in the silence. There's no caller ID, just the word unknown. The first instinct is to ignore it. After all, it could be a scam, a misdialed number. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and eventually, someone answers. "Hello." At first, there's nothing but static on the line. Then a voice emerges, low, whispering, almost mechanical. It's hard to tell if the speaker is a man or a woman. The voice feels inhuman, layered, as if several people are speaking in unison. It begins to describe, in unnervingly precise detail, the death of the person who answered. Not a vague prediction, but vivid imagery. The way the blood will pool, the color of the sky at the moment it happens, the smell of burnt flesh or damp earth. Every word sinks like ice into the listener's chest. "Who is this?" they stammer, but the voice ignores them, continuing its grim narrative. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the line goes dead. For some, the description of their death feels absurd. They laugh it off, thinking it's a cruel prank. But the images linger, and within days, or sometimes hours, the events play out exactly as the voice foretold. One woman was told she would die in a fire, trapped inside her own home. She spent the next week paranoid, extinguishing candles, avoiding the stove. Then, one stormy night, lightning struck a tree outside, sending it crashing through her roof and setting her house ablaze. A man heard he would be hit by a train. He avoided train stations entirely, but on his way home, his car stalled on a railroad crossing. The horn of the oncoming train blared as he scrambled to escape. He didn't make it. Word of the silent caller spread, whispered in hushed tones. Some people started turning off their phones at night. Others changed their numbers, hoping to escape the curse. But the calls always found a way through. Then came Sarah. She was a skeptic, the kind of person who dismissed ghost stories and urban legends. When her phone rang late one night, she answered without hesitation. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was different this time, more urgent, more frantic. It described her death in harrowing detail. A shadowy figure lurking in her home, a knife glinting in the dark, her blood soaking the carpet. But Sarah didn't panic. "Nice try," she said, hanging up. She locked her doors and windows, set her alarm system, and went to bed, proud of her defiance. Hours later, she woke to the sound of her alarm blaring. The house was pitch black, the power out, heart pounding. She reached for her phone to call for help. But as the screen lit up, she saw a single notification. Missed call, unknown. A shadow moved in the corner of her room. The screen went dark. Sarah froze, her breath hitched, and her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might give her away. The shadow didn't move again, but she knew she wasn't alone. The room was suffocatingly silent. Slowly, Sarah reached for the bedside lamp, her trembling fingers fumbling for the switch. But as she clicked it, nothing happened. The power was still out. She grabbed her phone, its faint glow illuminating just enough to show the outline of her room. She scanned every corner, every crevice. Nothing. Maybe she imagined it. Maybe her mind was playing tricks. Suddenly, her phone vibrated in her hand. Unknown is calling. Her heart dropped. She stared at the screen, paralyzed. The urge to decline the call was overwhelming, but something deep inside told her she couldn't ignore it this time. With shaking hands, she answered. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice cracking. The same eerie, layered voice responded, but now it was more chilling than ever. "You didn't listen, Sarah. You never do." Her pulse quickened. "Listen to what? This is a prank, and I'm not falling for it." The voice chuckled darkly, a sound that sent shivers racing down her spine. "Prank? You still think this is a game? Look behind you." Sarah's blood ran cold. She didn't dare turn around. Her phone screen flickered, and a new sound emerged from the call. Slow, deliberate breathing. It wasn't coming from the phone. It was in her room. Gathering her courage, Sarah spun around, holding her phone's dim light like a shield. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure cloaked in shadows. Its face was obscured, but the glint of a blade in its hand was unmistakable. "You have one chance," the voice whispered. "Run." Without thinking, Sarah bolted from her bed, her feet barely touching the ground as she raced down the hallway. Behind her, heavy footsteps pounded, closing the distance. She reached the front door, fumbling with the locks in her desperation. Her hands were slick with sweat, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the lock clicked open, and she yanked the door wide. But outside wasn't her street. It wasn't her neighborhood. It was a dark, endless void, stretching in every direction. The voice returned, now coming from all around her. "You can't escape, Sarah. It's already begun." She turned to retreat back into the house, but the door was gone. She was trapped in the void, the footsteps growing louder, closer, and then the phone rang again. This time, the screen didn't say unknown. It displayed her own name.
If you've enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have a tale of your own or a legend you'd like us to explore? Let us know. You might just hear it next. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Because here, the darkness is always waiting just for you.